Also, you've got objections about why not using Webflow. All right, let's talk about this. Hey design friends, what is up? My name is Ron Sale. Welcome back to Flux, and today I want to address a lot of the objections that I hear. I wouldn't say from haters, but people that are not sure about using Webflow or have all of their reasons why Webflow is not a good platform for them. I want to give my opinion in addressing these objections. So let's dive right into them. So the first one is you shouldn't use anything that's not open source. First of all, I want to address how this is phrased. You shouldn't use anything. I really try to be careful with what you should and shouldn't do. I mean, I think everything has pros and cons, and I think that you should make a decision for yourself. Now, the way I see this, there's always trade-offs between open source and closed source. And there's a lot of good things about being open source. And obviously the debate here is between WordPress, which is open source and has a lot of plugins and everybody can develop and adjust it as they are, versus Webflow, which is more like a closed garden. And the way I think about this is kind of like, you know, Google, Android is more open source versus Apple is more like a closed garden. And the trade-offs between open source and closed garden is a lot of times it's about quality and reliability on the closed garden versus, you know, extensiveness and adaptability or customizability in the open source. So depending on what you care about, my basic preference is I'd rather go into something that is I can rely on. I know that it's high quality. I know that it will work, and just use it as it is, even if it's not fully extendable. That's my basic preferences, but I do acknowledge that there are benefits to using open source sometimes. In general, in the development community, there's tons of things that are open source and are pushing development forward. I'm pretty sure Webflow themselves are using open source libraries and stuff like that in their own software as well, because everybody uses open source these days. And so again, you should do whatever works for you. But for me, the reliability and trustworthiness of knowing that there's kind of like mother and father for this software, which I can, if I have problems, I know who I can talk to versus it's just some open source project on the internet. For me, that leads to more security and reliability, which is why I go for that. Second thing, the hosting is too expensive. What is too expensive? You know, is charging $30,000 per website is too expensive? I mean, expensive, whether something is expensive or not really depends on how much value you're getting from it. Now, actually in the hosting world, you know, what are the comparables? You're comparing like $5 per month or something with $15 per month. These are really looking at a yearly, at a yearly cost. This is not a lot of money at all. And for me, the time that it saves, just the ability to be able to go to my website, which is hosted on Webflow, make the changes I want, and then publish with one click versus exporting code, uploading it into a different server, and, you know, publishing it over there. It's just so much, you know, so the time that it saves, not even talking about scalability, security, all of these other things. The benefits for me are so much bigger than whatever, $200 per year. What is $200 per year? That's like 2-3 hours of work. If that on a yearly base, if Webflow saved you 2-3 hours of work, that already paid back that money. And so what is too expensive? I think like the time saved really pays it back. Webflow contradicts itself as a no-code platform and then makes you learn an entire new UI and recommends you understand basics of HTML and CSS. I do agree that there is kind of a misleading notion in the term no code. Literally you're not writing code, but it is true. In order to make the best out of Webflow, you do need to understand the HTML and CSS concepts, which makes learning Webflow a bit more time consuming and an effort. That being said, it's like I would think about this as if I would tell you like, hey, you should learn how to drive because cars will get you to your destination way much faster than walking. And you're going to tell me, oh, right, but then I have to learn how to drive. Yeah, you have to learn how to drive, but it's going to be worth the investment because you're going to be able to reach your destination very, very fast. So I feel like the same is true for Webflow. I mean, you have to learn the fundamentals of HTML and CSS. That's very, very useful. It's not as in-depth and time-consuming as learning how to code, because you don't have to remember all of the CSS properties and syntax and all of those things, because you're not literally coding. But yeah, you do have to understand the frameworks, and then you'll be able to go very, very fast. In general, I think you'll be a very much more smarter designer and developer for the web if you understand these concepts. So I agree, there's a misleading notion there, but I do think that it's worth the effort. Webflow is way too complicated to use compared to Wix and Squarespace. I think that it is way more complex. I don't think that it is too complex. Too complex kind of like means that you can't learn it, but I do think that it's more complex. And to be honest, I don't think it's for everybody. I don't think anybody needs to learn that extra complexity. It is true. If what you're doing in general is taking templates off Squarespace and just adapting them, changing the headlines and changing maybe the images and changing the fonts, then maybe it's not worth the extra complexity. I acknowledge that. But if what you're doing as a designer is to create custom experiences where you have to start working from scratch, then you understand the limitations of working with templates like Squarespace and Wix, and then you have to, obviously because you want something more complicated to build, you have to use something that it's a little bit more complicated to build it with. So it is more complicated, and not everybody should learn that extra thing, but depending on if you want to build complicated things, you should use the more complicated solution. Anything that claims to replace coding and claims that you can build professional level website without knowing any code is a gimmick. Well, again, I don't think that Webflow claims it replaces all coding. What I do think that they claim, and I do agree that there is, as we've talked about this before, there's a misleading notion of you don't have to code at all. And I think it has to do with marketing, that it just works to tell people, oh, you don't have to code at all. It's a big marketing promise. But I do think that in general, Webflow does not claim it will replace all developers. I do think that in the world of development, which is a very broad kind of world, there is some like deep creative development which solves complicated problems. And then there are things which is like HTML and CSS, which most of the time, again, not all of the time, but most of the time, like 90% of the time, it's just implementing the design, and it's just execution. There's no creative work over there. And I think that by using a software that can make that process faster, you can replace the stuff that at the end of the day is boring for real developers to do anyway, and it's just grunt work. So it's not replacing all development, and every time you want to, think outside of the box and do something super creative or super complicated, or, have a backend or something like that, you're gonna still have to use developers. But for most of the things, for like 90% of the things, you can build really amazing stuff, and the coding is mostly grunt work. And so Webflow replaces that grunt work. And yeah, so I don't think it's a gimmick. And again, professional, you can build professional stuff without coding as well. So the definition of what professional is it a gimmick? I don't know. I think it is being used as marketing, as a marketing tool. But I think that if you think about this deeper, they're not really going to replace developers. So nobody should kind of like, oh, I'm going to lose my job as a developer. But it is going to make the work of a lot of people more efficient. All right, these are the claims that I had. If you have more kind of like objections or claims why Webflow doesn't work for you, leave them in the comments section below and we'll address them in another video. If you're interested in learning Webflow, just make sure that you check the link below the video. Check out our Webflow Masterclass, and we'll catch you on the next video. Peace out.